I've been putting this one off for a while, but I figured it was time to talk about one of my absolute favorite directors, Don Coscarelli. He's the creator of the Phantasm films, and he's done a few other things that could be considered genre. I've been lucky enough to meet him a couple of times, and I even went to the premiere of John Dies at the End, where I got to meet Angus Scrimm a little bit before he passed. Um, Now, for this list, we're going to cover the whole Phantasm franchise, even if there's one entry that he didn't direct, but we have those 5 films, plus a few others, although I didn't put in the couple of comedy drama flicks that he did. So, as usual, I sent this list out to my patrons, and they ranked them up with their favorite up at the top and their least favorite in dead last. I then assigned point values to each of those rankings, so first place was worth 1 point, and so on down the list. This month, these guys answered the call, and there was 36 entries in total, including mine, and that means that the best possible score would be 36, and the worst, if everyone had the same film in dead last, would be 324. So, let's see how these films stack up against each other and see if it turns out to be a dream or just a confusing nightmare.
Okay, and goodbye.
Coming in at our dead last spot, and this was like one of our most all over the place lists of films that we've had in a while, because out of a possible 324, this one landed at 257 points. And we have the only non-Coscarelli helmed flick on this list, with Phantasm Ravager. This did get put in the dead last spot 14 times, which was 39% of them, so more than 1 in 3 people had it there, but it did get a number of decent scores too, and even got a single first place vote. And I didn't have this in my dead last spot, but it was close since I put it in 8th. But I kind of admire what they attempted here. They really put this together with very little at their disposal in terms of money and resources, and there's a certain amount of innovation on hand here in terms of the storyline. So there's things about it that I respect, but some of the ways that they went about those money-saving methods were a detriment to the film, since the digital effects are just so jarringly bad and distracting. Simple things like muzzle flashes on guns and yellow goop flying through the air just look embarrassingly fake. And it's not that bad in the first half of the movie. There's a handful of sketchy effects, but they're not too frequent. But then they just get to the future stuff, and it's just so goofy looking. But I think that the thing that's the most frustrating is that this was the chance to achieve some sort of closure. Angus wasn't doing so well, and it was clear that this was the last time he was going to be able to do this. So I was hoping that they would tie things together. I didn't really need them to lay out all the answers or anything and spell it all out, but it mostly just seems to set up a new adventure and tease some of those answers, and just doesn't feel like a proper goodbye to these characters, which is a bummer, because part 4 actually did feel like closure and a proper goodbye. And whereas I do like the whole exploration of the narrative as a metaphor for dementia and that element, I didn't like that they made it all Reggie's perspective in his story as opposed to Mike's. This whole series has been through his eyes and his skewed point of view, so now having it be Reggie's feels off. Our number 8 film dropped down to a whole bunch since we're decreasing by about 30 points here and going to 226. And next up is the one that I initially wasn't sure I was going to put on here, Survival Quest. It took the dead last spot 10 times for 28%, so a little over 1 in 4 people had it there. But again, still some high scores since it also got 1 first place vote. And this is the one that I had in dead last. But I'll stress that I do like it, and I enjoy every film on this entire roster. But the weirdest thing about this movie is just how unweird that it is. Coscarelli has established a career and reputation for these oddball, quirky films, and I'm sure that there's some out there that question if he can even make a straightforward film. So this one proves that he can. And he can, because this is a well-made film. It's a simple story with a bunch of characters that feel well established and don't all just blend together, and you're able to get a feel for each of them even with limited screen time. But he had the added benefit of having some great actors. I mean, you have Lance, and he was already working steadily at this point, and you have Mark Rolston before he did a ton more, a young Dermot Mulroney, and even a little baby Catherine Keener, who's nearly unrecognizable. The story is simple enough in that it's a variation on Lord of the Flies in a way, and you just have that survivalist going nuts aspect, so it's not exactly the freshest story, but at least it's a pleasant take on it all. In the end, though, for me, personally, even though this is a well-made movie and one that I do enjoy, it's not really what I want from a Coscarelli film. I want that weirdness. I want the oddball characters and dreamlike tone that doesn't always make sense. It's what I'm signing on for. And even if this is giving me something that I do enjoy, I feel like it could have been so much more.
Straight.
That'll take us to our 7th place film here, and this one was really close. This one was a 1-point race, and this movie squeaked by with 225 points, and it's Phantasm Oblivion. Consider this, this was only put in dead last twice, and was almost beat by a film that had 10 of them, so this just had overall lower scores than Survival Quest. And it didn't get any first place picks, but it was put in 2nd place twice. And I have this one slightly higher than where it landed since it's my 6th place movie. And one thing to keep in mind here is that the budget was just so much less than it had been. They went from $3 million in part 2 to $2.5 in part 3, down to a mere $600K for this entry. And it was essentially a band-aid that was slapped on there after they couldn't get the money to do Roger Avery's big apocalyptic entry funded, even though that never happened. Like, the big shot of all the spheres swarming in the opening sequence was done by fans, and it wasn't intended for the movie, but they were able to put it in there. They also made the most of what they had by using deleted scenes from the 3-hour cut of the original film, but that doesn't just feel like extras thrown in there. They found a way to make it key to the plot. I do wish that the story was stronger, since it's mostly just our heroes wandering around, and this is now the 2nd film in a row that's intent on keeping Mike and Reg separate and trying to get back to each other, so the plot's getting a bit stale. One thing I really do like here is the ending, and I know it feels like it's a cliffhanger, but I saw it as an ending, at least to how I figured that the story plays out. And I suppose I'll have to make a video someday on what that is. I do have to mention as well that yes, Ravager is part 5 and emphasized the V for the Roman numerals, but I love the use of the IV in Oblivion for the 4 here. Here we go with our number 6 film, and it was a steeper drop down because we go down 21 points to 204. And it's just one movie earlier with Phantasm III, Lord of the Dead. This is our first film on the roster to not get any dead last votes, but it did get 5 8th place ones, and it also did get 1 first place spot. And I put this one in 7th place. And I have a complicated sort of relationship with this entry because I do love it, but there's elements that I find disappointing. I think that the problem here is that they went a little closer to the vibe of part 2 with making it more action-oriented, even though the restraints were off on the dream stuff, which I'll mention when I talk about the 2nd film. But I think my main irritation with this one is the character of Tim. It just seems like they wanted to have this Home Alone element to it, and he just doesn't click in the way the others do. And I feel like they knew he wasn't that strong of a character since they just killed him off and no one ever made mention of him again. And then they spend so much time with the goofy crooks, and they're just not that interesting. The 2nd film had that creepy Lurch-looking guy and the gas mask boys, and they felt like solid spooky villains, but this trio just isn't intimidating in the slightest. I do like Rocky, though, and if we just had Rocky and Reggie looking for Mike against villains more like the 2nd film, I think I would have liked it more. Or even included Tim but just without the Home Alone stuff. I don't know. There's still plenty to love, though, because I really like the addition of the lore with the spheres and reintroduction of Jodie and the fleshing out of the spheres to also be byproducts of their whole process. Here's our number 5 film, and it's our dead center. It's got 4 above it and 4 below it, so it's average, I guess. That's probably fitting, because with 180 points, a drop of 24, it's the Beastmaster. It's fitting that it's the average because it was put into dead last 6 times for 17% of the votes, but was also put into first place 5 times, our second highest amount of number ones. So people either loved or hated this one. And this is one that I have right where I landed, since I put it in 5th place as well. And let me tell you, I have an immense amount of nostalgia for this film, even if I could admit that it's not that great. I guess that Coscarelli himself isn't that happy with it, since he didn't have as much control as he wanted, but it doesn't really show in the finished product. And when I say that I have nostalgia for this one, I mean it's probably because I watched this film every other day on HBO way back when, because that's how much it was on. Again, the running joke for a while was that HBO actually stood for, hey, Beastmaster's on. But I also think that when I'm thinking about sword and sorcery movies, this is one of the first things to come to mind. It's got that whole fantasy element involved, and yet also plays well as an action film. And the world it's creating just feels really fleshed out. Things like the bird people and the berserkers all just feel like a natural fit. There's some of the barbarian style films that just played with the action end of things, like the sword part, but this one has just as much of the sorcery. And this does manage to still pull off the Coscarelli style. There's a certain degree of surreal to this, and that off-kilter sensibility that could be a detriment, but here, it just adds to the mystical, otherworldly feel of this realm. Heading into the top half of the roster now, and our number 4 film was another close call because it's only 2 points lower than Beastmaster, and it's the director's most recent work with John Dies at the End. There's not many dead lasts left to give out since we've covered 32 of the 36 of them, but this got 2, so there's only 2 left. This did have its fans though, and had a bunch of higher numbers, including one number 1. And again, I'm right on track with this since I put it in 4th as well. And you know, I mentioned that this was Don's most recent work, and that sucks because this came out in 2012, 13 years ago. I know that he's done other stuff since, but I hate that it's been that long since we've gotten a film from him. But this is a film that I was really invested in when it came out. I was a huge Coscarelli fan, so clearly I was into it, but I had also read and loved the book, so this felt like a perfect combination. I remember seeing the book at like a Borders, back when Borders still existed, and the cover just grabbed me, so I bought it and loved it. And the book was this series of short stories. It was originally done as a succession of web stories, so it felt very episodic, and it was questionable how that would be translated into a feature. But this pulls it off. The scattered nature of it works well with Coscarelli's style, and he manages to make it feel like it all gels. I will say that the setup on this one is better than the payoff, but holy crap is that setup amazing. The weird mystery of everything and the soy sauce is just so cool, and it's possibly one of those things that's better when it's left unknown, but holy crap, is that ending reveal worth the price of admission.
I suppose you're wondering what I'm doing with this can of gasoline.
Top 3 time, and our number 3 film was a big drop down because we're going down 34 points. It's time to check out Bubba Ho-Tep. This one did get dead last twice, and that's the end of our dead last votes, but it was also put into first place 4 times. Well, I have this one ever so slightly higher since I put this one in my second place spot, and this is 100% a film that I understand if you give a lower ranking to. This movie is totally about creating a very specific vibe and tone, and if you don't click with it, then this movie's just not going to resonate in any way, shape, or form. But let me tell you, it resonates strongly with me, and it's amazing to me how well this film straddles the line between being funny, yet sad, and silly, yet dark. I guess I'll throw an emphasis on the sad, because this is not an upbeat movie, like, at all. And so much of it depends on the performances of Bruce and Aussie, and they just nail it. Campbell's performance is cool, because you can still see the actor in there, but he feels like a character, and not just a guy doing an Elvis impression. He's really making his own thing here, and it works really well. And somehow, before seeing this, I was not really familiar with Ossie Davis, but I sure as hell was afterwards, because he comes damn close to stealing the show here. But much like with John Dies at the end, I was also invested in this beforehand, and even though I didn't read the novella it was based on, I enjoyed a bunch of other stuff from Joe R. Lansdale, and I like his style as well. And I remember thinking that he and Coscarelli should blend well together, and they sure did. And I can remember going to see this in the theater, and I went in with an ex, and I distinctly remember that I had to drag her to it, and she was not excited about it, but left thinking it was one of the coolest movies that she's ever seen. There's only 2 films left now, and it's the Battle of the Phantasms, and all we have left are the first and second one. And our number 2 film, with 138 points, only 6 down from Bubba, and it's Phantasm II. There's no dead last left, but this did get 2 8th place spots, but it was also put into first place 3 times, which is actually less than Bubba and less than Beastmaster, but it was just more consistent all around. And I had Bubba as my number 2, so this was my 3rd place pick. And again, a movie that I just adore. And again, one that I saw when it came out. Yep, I saw this in the theater, and it was my first experience with the franchise. And wild story, I saw this in North Carolina in a predominantly black theater, and holy crap was the crowd into it. And it wastes no time being awesome. The scene with Reg in the house and the dwarves is a great action sequence and basically lays the groundwork for how this one is going to feel different from the first. The studio didn't allow them to be as vague as they were and have any of the dream stuff in this one, which is what makes it feel unusual in the series. And it's lacking that fantasy element that the first one had, which is a detriment, but Coscarelli was able to turn that around and make it work to his benefit. I'm not going to go so far as to say that it was an Alien to Aliens type of transition in genre, but it's also not too terribly far from that kind of thing. And there's a lot said about the fact that the studio didn't want Reggie Bannister or A. Michael Baldwin, so they had to swap in James LeGros, but he was able to convince them that Reggie was essential. But honestly, LeGros does a good job. This particular film requires a little more action hero style leading man, and I personally think he conveys that better than Baldwin would have. Ultimately, I have to admit that it's not exactly what I want when I'm thinking about a Phantasm movie, since for me it's all about that dream world thing, but it manages to be amazing nonetheless.
Hey! Suck on this.
And here we are, our top of the heap. The number 1 film for this round, and it can only be one film, and it was a bit of a blowout since we have a drop down of a full 71 points to 67, and all that's left is the OG Phantasm. The worst score that it got was 1 6th place vote, and it's the only movie here to not get put in either dead last or 8th place. Lots of love here as well, since it was placed in the number 1 position a whopping 20 times, so 56% of the rankers put it as their number 1, more than half. And it was number 1 for me as well, as I was one of the 20, and there was never any question that it would be, since this is the one that sets the bar. There's just something about this movie that makes it special. I don't know if it's knowing that it was made with such a low budget or by someone that was younger, but there's so many elements here that make it feel cooler. Keep in mind, he was only 25 when this came out, and he had already made 2 other films before this one. But also keep in mind that this was 1979. Nothing else out there was like this movie. Everyone else was thinking of ways to rip off Star Wars and Halloween. And then you have this oddball dream world mishmash of horror and sci-fi. And yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of rips off Star Wars with the dwarves looking like Jawas, but it's not the same thing. And yeah, it might be a little rough around the edges based on how much it cost. But that's a distinct part of its charm. But there's a magic here, and it's not hard to see why it captured so many minds. It's telling you a story, and it's a fairly simple story, but then there's all these embellishments, like the old woman, the whole ending switcheroo, the fact that the tall man distinctly changed into the lady in lavender so that he could make out with dudes in town, because let's face it, he didn't have to do that, right? All of those little flares take this rather basic narrative and turn it into a maze. A riddle. One that Don's never explained, and each further film just seems to add to the riddle instead. And I don't need the punchline of the joke, to be honest. Like, the setup is enough that I feel like whatever the actual answer is will never be as interesting as the possibilities that my mind is concocting. So yeah, I'm glad it's number 1, because nothing else has the balls to match it. So there you have it, 9 movies, all ranked up. And yeah, going into this list, I didn't really know how it would all shake out. And I'll be honest with you, let's take a look at the roster to see how this did turn out. Because yeah, I don't think there's any way that this could have turned out that I would have been that upset with. Maybe if the first movie was like not in the top 3 or something like that. But I'm pretty happy with how this shook out. It doesn't match my list exactly, but I mean, it's fairly close, and I'm pretty pleased with where all of these movies landed. But let me know if you disagree with any of these. Is there something that you would have liked to have up higher? Maybe you thought Ravager was way better and deserved to be much higher than in Dead Last. Tell me that. Tell me that down below in the comments. I want to hear it. I want to hear how you would have ranked these up. And just know that you can rank them up by going to patreon.com/movietimelines and becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month, and you can participate in these lists that we do every single month. There's always something different going on. We always have a new list to work on and watch movies and rank them up, and you can do that if you just go there and become a patron. Pretty easy to do. Also, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you like the channel, subscribe to it, and again, check out the Patreon page like these guys did. These guys are my patrons, and they are pretty fantastic for doing so and to help keep this channel going, which you can as well. But yeah, until next time, keep those balls in the air. See you later. Bye-bye.